The sole purpose of this video is to show how I use a 1/6 scale model to help construct an experimental full-scale environmentally friendly sailboat. It is for entertainment purposes only. I am not a shipwright, structural engineer, or naval architect. Any attempt to construct and or operate a vessel using my techniques or plans can result in serious injury or death. Anytime you are working with tools, you must follow manufacturer's safety precautions, recommended actions. You make sure you wear proper protective equipment when constructing a boat. You must also only use materials approved for marine use. If you want to make a boat similar to my design, you must consult a shipwright and or naval architect and or a structural engineer to ensure you have a safe boat and how to properly maintain and inspect it. I have no idea how safe this boat will be till it is completed and I have a chance to operate it. Before you operate any sailboat, you must get training from a qualified sailing instructor. Sailing in any boat can be dangerous. Okay, so that's basically should be just common sense. I shouldn't have to tell any of you that. But now let's take a look and see at the construction videos I made. If I can find them. Here we go. And let's see, as you can see, there's ribs here that got attached to the floor of the boat. The floor is cut out first, and the edges are beveled to match the ribs. Of course, before I do all that, we have to bend the floor and get the floor at the right shape. And that's what this board is for. There's different spacers on it. And I had 2 sheets of plywood, and I simply clamped them down to conform to the curvature I wanted. Of course, these are just scraps. The real ones were longer. And I glued them together. Once the glue dried, they held the curvature. You just put one piece down, it's not going to hold the curvature. All right, and you can see here, I guess how that fit the boat. Let's look at some more pictures here. I'm sorry I didn't make videos while this was being constructed. Come on. Show and folder. Now we want... Oh boy. Let's say paint. Put it in paint. It disappeared. Here we are. And these ribs were actually made a little too big. The real ones will be 2 inches, made out of 1/2 inch plywood. Notice also I kind of doubled up on the edge of the floor. This gives me more bonding area to attach the planks. Okay, these ribs really weren't made right. The proper ribs, as you'll notice, have notches in them because the planks overhang each other, and there's got to be a space for one plank to go over the other plank, so that's why there's notches in the ribs. And there's also little wedge strips that are put here to give more area and strength. So everything's glued together and held together by bolts. Probably an 1/8" bolt would do the job. The bottom of the plank and at the top of the plank. How do you attach the planks to the ribs? Because you can't screw into plywood parallel to the plies. So that's where L brackets come in place. So 2 L brackets would be attached to each rib, each plywood rib, and now we have something where we could attach the planks to. The planks could screw right onto these metal L brackets. That saves the weight of putting bonding strips along the edge. So that's the way the real boat would probably be. During my construction, though, I staggered the edges. There's a picture. As you see here, I just notched this, gave it more area, and I put strips of wood over the rib. So this is like 1/8" by 1/8", and I glued it to the plywood rib, so now I have something for the screws to go into. But the real one's better off with just brackets, so we don't have to add all this wood or glue all the wood to the ribs. This looks like just maybe a little better picture. Notice I just glued the diagrams. I traced and made photocopies of the ribs. Then I cut them out and glued it to the plywood, and here you can see the paper still remains. Again, you see the bevel and how the bevel matches the rib. It's all in line, all flush, so a nice area to glue the plank, glue and screw the plank to. Come on. And here we got all the ribs connected, and also the stem. Just another view of connecting or attaching the ribs. Just I glued them on. Of course, the real one we'd have to screw them on, where L brackets would come in handy here. Here I'm starting to attach the garboard. That's the first plank. And I'll use tiny little screws to screw them in place. Basically, glue and screw. And these screws are expensive, so basically once it dried, I unscrewed it and used screws in the next plank. Now, what I've done here is glued a little strip. You really can't see it, but that's what all these clothespins are for, is to hold a strip in place to make it a little bit thicker, so when I glue the next plank on, there'll be a little more depth to screw into, and also I can sand it and make the bevel. Remember, I showed you how this is supposed to be notched. So this notch was actually screwed in, and the clamps are holding it in. Once it's dried, clamps go off, and I can sand this down to the proper angle, if that makes any sense. Yeah, here you see a strip being glued in place. And again, once it's dry, it's just sanded down to get the correct angle. So that's probably the second garboard. And here you can see some brass screws I put in. The main thing is the glue is going to hold it in place. And again, I salvaged them after each plank dried. It's like the same one, I'm sorry. Kind of looking at the inside, here's the second plank going on, and this is basically a piece of cardboard I have. I'm making a template. I know how high it's supposed to be, and so to get this proper curvature, I basically taped it in place and then traced along the top of this plank so I know where to cut it. Once this pattern's made, then I cut it out of the plywood. Okay, sorry, looks like the same one. Here's another picture, again, of tracing. I guess you call it scribing, maybe. Unfortunately, the wood strips weren't long enough, and so I just glued a little piece on here to lengthen the plank. And of course, that's what will have to be done with a real boat, because the planks will be 12 feet long and plywood only comes 8 feet long. I'm sorry. Just, guess we already saw that one, or a similar one. Here's a good one. Now, unfortunately, not all these planks came out nice, neat, the way they should. I cut them with the scissors. And so what I did is I got some sandpaper and a block of wood, and here I am just sanding it to fair it out to make it smoother. I made a little line kind of giving me an idea where I want to go. I think I cut too much here and I glued another piece on. And so finally the plank will have a good looking shape. Here's the bow of the boat. You can see where the stem is. We can also see the gunnels. These are those strips of plywood I have attached. Plywood? No, I don't. I think this is actually basswood I used. I think 1/8 inch by 1/4 bass. I use that mainly for the gunnels. We got our stem. Yeah, it looks a little bit of a mess. Here are the ears for the rudder assembly. Remember, the rudder assembly rotates up if you hit something. And we'll look at that later. Here's the construction of the torque box for the rudder. It's basically plywood with some bass and just gluing it in place and the clothespins holding it in place. Here is the mast step. It's a little plywood, some bass blocks underneath it, and the plywood has a hole I drilled in it. Put some strips up here for the breast. The breast goes over this, gives it a lot more strength, and there's a hole, there'll be a hole in the breast except the mast. Another picture of the torque box. I'm sorry, this is the rudder. And just made out of thin sheets of plywood. It's being glued together. And this rod, of course, turns the rudder. That's basically all the pictures I have of the construction of the boat. Again, here's the boat. Has a removable seat. The object is keep the weight down while you're lifting it up on top of the car. When one person's here, you can sit further up front toward the center to steer it. If there's two people, you're sitting closer to the back, you can bend this up, hit something, and it springs up. So that's what this little torque box does. Here's the breast I was talking about. Here's the hole in it for the mast. Here's the mast. This is a gaff rig. I think it looks better than the triangular type. And this is the lee boards, held again by spring. Adjust these a bit. They shouldn't be springing up this much. A little more work to do on that. But back breast, flat bottom. Here's our gunnels. So again, if everything's off, the idea is to, I was hoping it would weigh more like 60 pounds, unfortunately. The wood and paint and glue and hardware is going to probably bring the weight up to about 72 pounds. I want it light enough for one person to put on top of his car by himself. And this is only doable if we're using okumi plywood. That's 20% lighter than other marine plywood. Maybe some of the varnish will evaporate a bit. I figured 10 pounds for a gallon of it. Or you could paint it. I hate making the boat smaller, less than 12 feet. But and again, I was hoping to get this more like 65 to 70 pounds. With the sail and everything, sail and lee boards, rudders, it's probably about 90 pounds or 95 pounds. But the hull itself, again, looks like so far 72 pounds. It could take about, one sheet of 4mm okumi, another 3mm. That's a 3mm would be the top board, top plank. 4mm the middle plank. 6mm the bottom plank is doubled up. 2 6mm for the floor. Here might be a better picture of how the planks get attached to the rib, because there'd be I'm sorry, these are planks to planks. Here's one plank, here's another plank, and they're attached like that. To attach it to a rib, we need an L bracket, small little L brackets. And here's a filler strip I was talking about. Here's plans looking down at it. You know, from these plans, you can tell what your bevel angle is going to be. Looks like we start out at about a 10-degree bevel at the top. And then we go to 15 at the next rib. There's a center rib. next further forward. Then we get a 30-degree bevel here. Of course, as you go down, the bevel changes slightly. All that is kind of important. Plans. Oh, this isn't full size. Let's look at this. I was mentioning the ribs should be about made out of 1/2-inch material, 2 inches thick. The reason is you got water forces on them, and they should resist the water pressure if the water's up to the gunnel without structural failure. That's one way. Another way, of course, is to have a round gunnel. When the gunnel is rounded, that also resists the force of the water. So I have double redundancy here. It's going to be both the gunnels in round planks that resist the water force, as well as the ribs. Either one should be able to do it. But just for your own curiosity, if we just look at 1 foot of water, 1 foot on the side of the boat, while it'll push with about 23 pounds at the top of the gunnel if there was no connection between the two of them. It forms an arch, and there'd be about 197 pounds of compression here, and the compression gradually changes. So here we get about 171 at the bow, and the forward component's around 130 pounds. That's from the left side, same from the right, that'd be 230. But that's for a foot. We got 6 feet. So you have to multiply this by 6, so you get quite a bit of forward force. Obviously, you don't have that problem at the bottom here because the floor resists that. But up here, all this forward force has to be held back by the skin of the boat or by the planks or by a, what do you call it, the stem. The stem would help do that too. Okay, well, I hope this is interesting. I was hoping to make the boat, but this okumi is very expensive, and there's about a $300 delivery charge. I was thinking of making a regular plywood, but that would add another 15 pounds or 20 pounds to the total weight, and the object's to make it light. So at this point, I'm not even sure if I will make the full-size boat, because it's a bit hard to wrestle a 75-pound boat on top of the car. You don't want to scratch the car. But then there's probably ways of modifying the roof rack, so I could slide it up on there and twist it. Well, thank you. I hope you found this interesting, and be safe. Take care.